Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of I Like to Read with me, your host, Rachel Polanski. Apologies in advance, I guess, the time I decided to record. There is a lawnmower violently going off in the background, so I'm sorry about that. But I did turn off the AC for you guys, so I tried to keep the audio as clean as possible. What else is new? We have been toying around with some fun different episode ideas beyond just sort of the 5 or 6 books that I read every week, especially tied into revisiting important books from the past, or maybe young adult series that you forgot that you read that were totally ahead of your time. Maybe you read them when you were 10. You definitely it was definitely meant for at least 14-year-olds. Or maybe, nostalgic books from 5th grade that you forgot were, actually good. So I have, I'm looking for my water. I have some ideas. We'll toy around with that and see, flesh it out a little bit. But if you have any suggestions or any topics that you would love to see me cover, not just, the 5 mostly contemporary books that I read that week, feel free to leave a comment, email me, DM me, whatever method you choose. Oops. Before we get into this week's books, figure we would also just start off with a fun little icebreaker for the episode, get the thoughts thinking and the mouth rolling. For book-related questions, would you rather for book nerds? I found this site from Bonafide Bookworm, which is 65 conversation questions about books and reading. And we'd be here all day if we went through all of them. And I would be a melting pile of sweat if we did, but instead we're just going to go through a few of the would you rather questions and I'll talk out my answers. So the first one is, would you rather read a book with terrible writing but a good story, or a book with a terrible story but good writing? Oh, I gotta just say from experience, terrible writing but a good plot. I do think that you can have good writing elevates a story to be good enough that even if it's the most mundane thing about a woman getting her nails painted, that the writing should be able to make that story good enough. But I feel writing can also always be improved if you have the bones of a good story. So I'm definitely going to go with, and also I've just read definitely more books that are I didn't love the prose or I didn't love the writing style, but I did love where it was going, and I did love if it had been fleshed out more, it could have been great. Would you rather not be able to read any new books or not be able to reread any books ever again? Well, if you are a longtime listener of this show, I think you're going to know the answer, unfortunately, despite I do have, my favorites out there, but I just love to read so many new things that, of course, I'm going to have to choose the new books, and hopefully if something is really great, then I can just look up a summary on Goodreads like I'm about to in a couple of minutes. Would you rather be able to only read the first page of a book or only read the last page of a book? Now, that is a really good question. I guess the first page, from both ends, if you're only reading the first page or if you're only reading the last page, you can either draw your own conclusions about what's to come or what has come before. And while sometimes it's also not even about the ending, it's about how you got there. It's about the journey, not the destination. I feel I could then imagine a lot more things from the beginning, but maybe that would be also unsatisfying, but knowing the end, but not knowing how you got there, any of the context, and sometimes the ending page isn't even related to the book. But I feel there was an exercise in 4th grade that always stuck with me. It was okay, we're all sitting on the circle, and the teacher's okay, so who wants, we need some volunteers to read the first line of the book that they're reading for free read. And of course, I chose a series of Unfortunate Events books, so the initial sentence was a paragraph long. But since then, it's always stuck with me just how important that opening sentence is. And while it might be something mundane, or, Scotty said, Gary went here, it really can set the tone for the whole book. And there can be such a great first sentence that doesn't necessarily foreshadow a great rest of the book, but it can often, if you have a great first sentence, usually you're going to start off on a good pitch. And just because your first sentence isn't necessarily the most vivacious, wonderful thing, it's not necessarily going to start, it's not a bad book. And I think, it's not something we necessarily pay attention to is what exactly is the very first line of the book. But if you're cognizant about it, next time you are picking up a book, or go back and look through some of your favorite books and see if it's the first line that really sticks out for you, or what is it about that book that makes it your favorite, beyond just, the first line, what really drew you in. Because oftentimes it takes, we already either have the idea of the book in our head that we want to read, so even if we don't find it to our liking or make it all the way through, chances are we'll make it at least past the first line. But like I said, that's such a big impression, and it's really interesting to go and see how different authors and different styles and genres approach the first sentence. Water break. So I think, there's like 15 of these, and like I said, we could go on forever, but let me know if you liked that. Just been wanting to add some more stuff to these episodes beyond just the books I'm reading, because while I can talk about them, and give my thoughts, it does get a little bit repetitive, I guess, unless you're like really actually reading or hoping to take a lot of recommendations for these. But I also do appreciate, I have, started to slowly but surely get some, repeat fans who are not direct friends and family. So if you are one of those people listening, thank you very much. I have enjoyed getting to know you and talking to you on Instagram and hearing your book recommendations, and I've added them to my lists, and I'll get to them at some point. And if and when they are featured on the show, I will definitely shout you out. But if you're new to the show, heyo, always love to chat about books offline or online. If you're an author or have something you want to plug, also hit me up. But without further ado, let us get into, again, cheating because recording this a little bit later and took a week off, and apologies for the sporadic recording schedule. You should be getting a new episode in your feed / YouTube subscription box, hopefully every week. What day and time that is may vary. It might be 8 days or so, but as the Beatles said, hold me, love me, 8 days a week. Copyright. Okay, so our first book that we have is Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. And this is kind of ironic that I'm starting with this one because I have to say I was not super into it in the beginning. It is a sweeping novel, and when I say sweeping, I mean that quite literally. It is a little over 600 pages, so this one did take me quite a few days to read because it is such a long, intense, heavy story, and not heavy in the sense that there's, a lot of like dark things happening, but heavy in the sense that there's just a lot happening, and it takes a little bit to sink in, and the different points that go on in the book. So in the beginning, I wasn't really quite sure where it was going. I knew that we were dovetailing between the perspectives of a modern day woman named Hedley Baxter, who is shooting this film in Los Angeles about a woman named Marion, who was Marion Graves, who is the female daredevil aviator who, come to think of it, I'm pretty sure this is, obviously they reference Amelia Earhart and real people, but I'm pretty sure the character of Marion is fictional or definitely based on somebody. And this, I would consider it it's fiction. I don't think it's period piece, and there's a lot of history in it about aviation and about we span Prohibition, and we span all different kinds of places, including Alaska and the Pacific Northwest and Europe and New Zealand and Los Angeles. So Hedley's story kind of dovetails with the actual Marion story. And my complaint about this maybe is because it started off a little bit Hedley light at the beginning, and I was sort of like, okay, where is this going? This is just another like failed actress or woman who's on the verge of losing her career in Los Angeles. And not that I don't like those kinds of novels, but I was interested to see how her story would really interplay with Marion's. And Marion is really just such a fantastic character. Literally, from birth, she was rescued from a drowning boat in 1914, and then it spans her entire life and how she goes on this journey to fly across the globe from the North and South Poles and goes missing, and no one ever really knows what happens to her. So Hedley's role is to sort of flesh out Marion's story beyond what the public knows, and I honestly feel like that's my one complaint, as I could have really done without her storyline, because I just feel like Marion's storyline is so rich and comprehensive that it spans enough without Hedley's perspective. But I do think that does help anchor us to the present day and remind us why this story is still important. So kudos to Maggie Shipstead for really a sweeping novel. Definitely reminded me a lot of Middlesex, just in terms, not in terms of the themes necessarily, but in terms of the same literary styles of just sweeping historical moments and the everyday people who sort of become extraordinary in other people's minds, and the person behind the name. So next we have Things We Lost to the Water by Eric Nguyen. So this one is about a Vietnamese family, a young mother and her 2 sons. They leave Vietnam because it's a very terrible lifestyle for them, and they go to America It's not much easier there for them to start out with. They end up settling in New Orleans pre-Hurricane Katrina, and then the novel kind of ends with the effect of Hurricane Katrina. That's not necessarily a spoiler because, if you're in a novel where you're dealing with the chronology of time in one story that's not necessarily set in a specific year and you're moving to New Orleans, even though this is fictional, Hurricane Katrina's got to come into play at some point. Also, the title, Things We Lost to the Water. But it's, a story of how people adapt differently to change and to life in America. We get to see the mother's perspective. Her name is Huang. We also get to see Tuan and Bin. Their different perspectives, too, and the way that they adapt to growing up in America after having started off their lives in Vietnam. And it's very different, the way that they adapt and change, and the way that their relationship as a family adapts and changes. So we really get to see, like I said, we end with Hurricane Katrina, but I believe that the novel starts in the early 90s. So we definitely, get the span of their lives, maybe even late 80s. So definitely, while it, again, deals with some darker stuff, there is tragedy and loss, and there is darkness that comes with Hurricane Katrina. Ultimately, it is also a story of how to maintain relationships with your family, and, blood is literally thicker than water, and what it means to be a member of a family that has gone through hardship while also trying to forge your own path and identity. So definitely, while it doesn't sound like a lot happens, it's just interesting to get a peek, into someone else's family and someone else's life, whether they're fictional or non-fictional, and Eric Nguyen just does a really great job of developing those characters and making you feel and grow and change alongside them. So next, the next two, because again, I'm cheating and they're 6, kind of go together. They're both what I would call the stereotypical beach read, in the sense that they take place mostly over the summer and in vacations and sort of lighter topics, but they do, while I definitely stuck to like this women's lit / chick lit, which I think 10 years ago maybe these authors would have been pigeonholed into. Now I would just again consider it part of the contemporary fiction, that because of the nature of when it's released and sort of the marketing is definitely targeted to be a beach read, but could be just as enjoyable if you're listening to this 6 months from now, or happen to add it to your Kindle and not get to it till a year later, which has happened to me many times. Fun to read anytime, but as we are entering into summer and hopefully you are vaccinated and safe, the opportunities to go out to the beach and on vacations are definitely more aplenty, and one of the 2 books, but also all the books I mentioned here, are great to bring in your tote bag. So first we have People We Meet on Vacation, which is definitely more of like a romance-heavy beach read. I feel like beach reads, not necessarily, while they have this sort of like lighter quippiness, Great Circle is definitely not what I would call the stereotypical beach read. It's probably like what I would bring to the beach because it could last me the entire day, if not more, because that's 600 pages. And while these were both around 300, 400 page mark, they read much quicker and just not, they're different kinds of writing and they're different kinds of stories, but that doesn't make them any less cool or less important. They're just different. So People We Meet on Vacation, we're sort of immediately thrown into the story of Poppy and Alex, who are just friends. This story was also, I think, heavily inspired by When Harry Met Sally, and it tries to ask the question of, can men and women ever really be friends? From the moment that they start their friendship in college, there's clear that there's this sort of like sexual romantic tension between them, but for some, various reasons, they're always at different points in their lives, and they're never really able to maintain and take that relationship beyond the friendship level, despite getting into both of their heads and knowing, at least from the start, that this is what Poppy kind of always wanted. And then very early on in the novel, we find out that there was sort of a rift in their relationship that leads to them no longer speaking, and Poppy is sort of at this crossroads in her life where rekindling and reconnecting that relationship with Alex sort of starts her off on this new road and this new path, because she was definitely not happy in her life before. So even though it's kind of, they're going to end up together, that they're meant to be, it's just, they're really I always say well developed, but Poppy and Alex were just really fun. And it was like, even though you knew they were going to get there, it was kind of like, you're just both, if you could only hear what the other one is thinking, or if you can only say what the other person, wants you to say, then you guys would be perfect. But, it's a comedy of errors, and, it's very realistic to what happens in real life. I know that while some of these circumstances in this fictional universe may be, of course, a little exaggerated, it's definitely a story that happens to a lot of people. And yes, men and women can just be friends, but when you start off that friendship, already, with a secret desire, even if that's a little bit subconscious, it's going to get messy. But because they're able to have this really strong friendship to begin with, they get to know each other in different ways. And the way that their relationship develops is really beautiful and special, and not exactly something that is easy to write. So it definitely comes across really well. Next, we have That Summer by Jennifer Weiner. Jennifer Weiner is a freaking fantastic author, a longtime lover. I've her, Good in Bed and In Her Shoes, and I can't even remember. Yeah, I've definitely even talked about her on the podcast before. Mrs. Everything. I've pretty much, I think, read everything she's read, including her memoir, and the way that she grew up and learned to love writing and reading is really great. So I definitely recommend that if you haven't already. That Summer sort of is a little more thrillery, and there's no murders or anything terrible, but one of our main characters, Diana, suffers a horrific incident at the beginning of what's supposed to be a wonderful summer as a teenager in Cape Cod. That incident sticks with her throughout her entire life. And we flash back to her past on the Cape and sort of what happened to that as we combine with the present. And Diana is forging this relationship with this young woman named Daisy. And at first, we're not super sure how their paths are going to intertwine, because it's very clear that there's sort of this two Diana's paths presented, and each one kind of represents some hopes and desires that the other one wishes that they could have had. And, this sort of is the grass greener on the other side. But we quickly find out that their paths are intertwined. They're both really just raw, nuanced, three-dimensional. While they may, could easily be placed into boxes or stereotypes, they quickly defy these. Weiner is just so great at getting to know these women and getting to really get under their skin and make them come alive in the best ways possible. That really takes us from more than just a book to a full, you really feel you're there that summer. And as somebody who's from the East Coast and grew up going to Cape Cod a lot of summers, I haven't been in at least 5 years, pretty much since I moved here, I think. It really evoked those memories, and it really just brought that summer landscape to life. And I know for some other people that's the Hamptons, or that's, Lake Michigan or whatever. So whether or not you are actually familiar with Cape Cod, as somebody who did visit there and, kind of grew up, I want to say grew up there. I mean, we went for a week most summers, didn't have a house or anything fancy. But it was really special to see that part of the Cape come alive and be sort of its own character and backdrop to the Diana and Daisy's story. All right, and next we have The Plot by Jean Hanff Korelitz. And fun fact, Jean Hanff Korelitz actually wrote a book called This Will Be My Undoing, which is what I think that's what it's called, right? I say this as if I know the answer. But her book became the HBO TV series The Undoing, which, especially now with the likes of Mayor of Easttown out, which at the time of release will have already finished, and we will know who killed Aaron. And I'd love to know all your thoughts and theories about what you thought was going to happen and what actually happened, which future me will know, but current me doesn't. So she wrote that. I do remember really liking the book when it came out, definitely more than the actual series, The Undoing. So the plot is just a really good suspenseful thriller novel in a sense of, there's that same, is he going to get caught and will he pay for his crimes? But with the literary and the writing world and the price of fame in a way that is not always explored and always explored so well. So our main character, Jacob Finch Bonner, wrote a book, and that book blew up and became famous. And as a lot of people in the writing industry may know, okay, great, you publish your first book. Now it's almost the expectations for the second book are even higher. And so he has failed to disappoint. After a couple of other books, he's sort of resigned himself to a career as an MFA professor, still kind of searching for that next big novel and that next big thing. But he's not really sure what that's going to be, feeling very stuck, till all of a sudden a young man in his class presents this plot and this version of this book that he's working on that is almost too good to believe. It's so wild and crazy. And most of the details aren't really divulged, but it's enough where the author, Jacob Finch, he thinks this is fictional, of course, but he's okay, maybe you really got something here. So there comes a point in his life where he is, he thinks maybe he should pick up that novel. He learns that in the time since his student graduated or left his class, that nothing has ever been published, and that the student is actually no longer really doing anything. So Jacob decides to publish this novel based on what he thinks is just this wild, crazy idea from his student. And lo and behold, the publishing of that book not only stirs the sense in the fact that like someone knows that this is not his idea and that he took it, but the actual story behind the plot and the secrets behind it just keep unfolding. And yes, there were a couple of things that I definitely, kind of saw coming, but it's not even really about that. It's just about how like one little innocent mistake or something that, a white lie or a lie of omission or sort of, he wrote the book. He just didn't have the idea necessarily. And he figured the guy who had the idea isn't, in the picture anymore. But it kind of, questions, who owns the authenticity of a story? What are the ramifications of posting a story or publishing a story that is not entirely yours? And then the sort of thrillery elements that follow, of course, are a little bit fantastical because we're in this literary world, but it's just super fascinating. And the plot kept me going. And so the plot, definitely one for all of you mystery thriller lovers. And last but certainly not least, we have The Accidental Suffragist by Galia Gichon. So I was actually able to score an advance copy of this book, which is amazing. I was reached out to, I think, by the publishing company. They gave me an advance copy of this book. I devoured it in one day. It's definitely a shorter novel. I think it's around like 200 pages. Also, I believe at the time that this episode comes out that it is on Kindle Unlimited. So if you have a subscription, you can actually grab that for free. Or if you do like to read your books on Kindle and you don't have Kindle Unlimited, I think it's only $4.99. So it's definitely a bargain. As the title states, The Accidental Suffragist, our protagonist, Helen Fox, is a young mother who is kind of struggling. She has 4 children. This is in the early 1900s until one day a tragedy befalls her eldest daughter. And that tragedy sort of spurns and startles her, changes her life through an accidental coincidence. She gets caught up in the suffragist movement. So through Helen Fox, we get to see pretty much the entire suffragist movement as it was in the early 1900s from 1913 to 1919, spanning World War I and how women were involved in that movement, as well as the perspective of different men involved in it who were left overseas and the way that her children evolve. Definitely a lot happens in such a short amount of pages. I would say my one, complaint or gripe is that Helen almost felt like a little bit too sparse. And while this novel reads really quickly, so if you're looking for fast-paced, historical-based fictional accounts, then definitely check this one out. But I do feel like because there was that sparseness and not a sense of rushing, but I understand the notion to start with one point in history and end with the other one. I also understand that Helen is sort of supposed to be the everyday woman. She's not necessarily based on one woman in particular, but based on circumstances that real women had. So I also understand the sense of anonymity and the sense that her thoughts and ideas don't always feel incredibly special or nuanced. I think that's almost part of the writing. But I'm definitely, it was captivating. It was interesting. I learned a lot about the women's suffragist movement from that time that I didn't know. And it's very easily readable. I think I said, it reminded me of, if anyone read those like American Girl historical novels that kind of came alongside the dolls. You didn't have to purchase them, but they featured like the doll from that period and sort of a historical fictional novella about their life. Obviously, this is for adults. There's more mature subject and context, but it kind of felt that too. Like, let's explore history and let's like throw this one fictional person in there, surrounding them with real people and see what happens. And then you get a good book like The Accidental Suffragist. So I'm sweating. I'm done with the episode. Abrupt. But thank you so much for listening. As always, let me know what you're reading, watching, enjoying, mostly reading, but everything. And until next time, stay reading. Bye.